Hello, everyone. I'm pleased to have Franco here today, and we are going to have a very interesting insight into the last 50, 60, 70 years of his life in Australia, and a very good insight of life in Australia from his perspective. And that will be very enriching for us for charting our life in Australia. Welcome to Perth Dialogues, Franco.
Nirmal, wonderful. Thank you for having me. In fact, it's almost a unique. I think it's the first time in my life that I've ever been interviewed. So thank you. I'm honoured.
It's not much of an interview, but rather I would say a learning experience for me. I have been in Australia only for about 8 to 10 years, not much. I'm very new, so I think it will be a learning experience for me to learn from you how Australia has changed in the last 60, 70 years in terms of its multiculturalism, your experiences in different waves of people who came to Australia and the experiences that they have brought with them, how they have changed Australians' community, and then what's the way future? What do you think?
First of all, welcome to Australia, Nirmal.
Thank you.
Migration, what a fascinating thing. In fact, the entire world, human beings have got legs and they tend to use those legs. And since the good old days, especially the way we have developed various transport techniques, the movement of people nowadays is just unbelievable. Well, in terms of personal migration, our father, Giuseppe, he was called Joe in Australia, he came in 1952. And it's fascinating because he tried to migrate to the USA, and because he had 3 uncles there. And it's fascinating about my father's story because his father migrated to the USA in 1904. And there's another whole story behind that. He tried to go to the USA, but they wouldn't let him in, it seems, apparently. So he managed to come to Australia in 1952.
And how old were you then?
Well, when he came, he left his wife and 5 children back in Italy, in Vasto, Abruzzo, where we come from. The following year, he managed to bring his oldest son, and then Mama and us 4 kids came the following year, and we arrived here on the 18th of April, 1954.
54. So you almost just celebrated 70 years in Australia.
Next year, we will celebrate 70 years here.
I would like to get invited to the party.
Yes, I keep telling people that I'm beginning to suffer a little bit from dementia, so I must remember, and it'll be a pleasure to have you.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you came very young, about 8, 10 years. How were the initial days? Do you remember? What do you recollect or remember from those days?
I was almost 12 years of age when I came to Australia. And of course, the system then was by ship. And luckily, there were 3 new ships that the Flotta Lauro built in the early 50s. And there was Australia, Neptunia, and Oceania. And we came on the Oceania. Well, that was a fascinating trip. It was the first time in my life that I'd eaten a banana. And I was almost 12 years of age. And why did we not eat a banana? Because I remember back in Vasto, in the square, on the way to the cinema, we saw these bunches of bananas hanging there. But a banana was 50 lire then. And the cinema was 50 lire, so you had to make a choice. And the cinema lasted longer than a banana, so we used to look at the bananas and go to the cinema.
Ah, Wonderful.
And on the way here, we stopped at Port Said on the Suez Canal, and there the bananas were affordable and cheap, so we could afford to buy one.
And how was your initial days in Australia?
Now, another little event on the ship, which was very memorable for me. We were sitting at the dinner table one evening, and there was a lovely bottle of wine, long neck and a very flat bottom because the table tends to move in the water. And so I began to drink this wine there. And my mother and others didn't become aware that I had actually drunk half a bottle of wine on my own. And when they become aware of it and they saw that I said, oh, we better take him back to the cabin. Then I got up and I still remember. The floor looked to be very, very sharp indeed. And I was trying to walk on top of this very sharp hill of there. And so it's the first time in my life and the only time that I have been drunk. And that was on our way to Australia.
Lucky you got that experience very early in your life. So when you came here, you got into a schooling. So how were the schooling days?
The schools. We ended up living in First Avenue, Mount Lawley, and we went to Mount Lawley Primary School. And one of the things that I remember there was that the first day at school, my two sisters and I were sitting, having lunch outside with the rest of the kids. And we got this feeling that the other were looking at us in a strange way. And when we got that feeling, then we started looking at them and what they were eating. It seems why they were looking at a strange way is that we were eating the traditional Italian crusty bread. We looked at them and they were eating the typical square sandwich bread cut across diagonally. And the great surprise is that the crust was cut off from the bread. And we felt that this was the best part of the bread. So how do you explain this? And that's remained in my memory.
That's the first cultural difference you see when you are a kid in the school. Did you knew English when you came, or you took time to learn?
Well, on the way here, I did learn one word, and that word was my favorite word, which is book. And that's the only word that I knew when I arrived in Australia.
So how much time it took to you to learn it, and what challenges you faced when you were in the school and you had to interact in English?
Largely because I like study. I always enjoyed that. In fact, if I may recount a strange little story that my mother used to tell of me to the family, is that as a young child, and I don't remember, I used to cry. And when I cried, my mother would get a book, put it under my arm, and I would stop crying. Now, how do you explain that? I will never know. So it looks as though I've been a lover of books since birth. And then English. What a strange language English is. The spelling and the grammar structure. Wow, wow, wow. However, I managed well because within a couple of years, and by then we had moved to live in a country town called Pingelly. And there, within a year or two, I became the best speller in the classroom because I would look at the words very carefully and so learned. And in fact, perhaps I'm not being immodest, I hope, that by 1958, that's 4 years later, I did my junior in Pingelly, and I was the dux of Pingelly District High School. So there we are. I'd managed my English reasonably well.
Wonderful, wonderful. So you were good as a student. How was your early working life? What do you recall those days compared to working life today?
Well, in terms of work, that was interesting because in Pingelly we only went up to the so-called junior level at the time. At the age of 15, you did your junior. And at the time, most young people left, especially the girls, and they would go and work, and a lot of the boys as well. Only a tiny percentage went on to so-called high school. To do that, I then went to Narrogin, which was then 30 miles away, and there began to do my so-called leaving at the time. And being a Catholic, I would go to church, and the priest there, when they met me, he said, well, what are you doing here at school? You should be in Eunorcia, where there are Catholic colleges. And I took notice, and then I did one term in Narrogin, and then I went to do my leaving in Eunorcia. Have you been to Eunorcia?
No.
It's a monastic town. It's the only monastic town in the whole of Australia. It's unique, set up by the Benedictines, and they have a college for boys and a college for girls there as well. So spent almost 2 years there to do my leaving, and then I managed to get a scholarship and went to do first year medicine at UWA. Unfortunately, there was a subject there called maths and physics, which I wasn't too good at and did not manage to get through that subject. And so I had to give up medicine, did not continue with medicine. Pity, because had I been from a non-migrant family with more support from my parents and so on, I may have been able to cope with that, but I did not.
Very interesting, because I wanted to become a doctor, and I started reading books on anatomy. And I thought, I can't manage with anatomy, it's too much. There's too many jargons, too many words, too much to learn. But I got into engineering, so that was not fun. So in your initial days as a student and then going out to work, did you face many challenges as a migrant when you were from an Italian background into an predominantly English community, or was it easy?
Well, typically then, the policy, which always continue to wonder, they had a policy called assimilation those days. That is, you had to become so-called Australian. And in fact, I had to change my name from Franco, which what I was called in Italy, and I became Frank. And my family still call me Frank. Although, in my case, I am particularly keen about culture. What are we? We are what we were born into, and that's what we are. And we love to maintain what we are. So, in the night, it was 1988, I think, that Prime Minister, who was the Prime Minister at the time? There we are, dementia sitting in. Made the announcement that Australia was a multicultural nation. Well, I thought, we could have told him that we've been a multicultural nation for a long time in Australia. But from that day, my name became Franco again. And people, when I mention my name, even today, when I say my name is Franco, they say, oh, hello, Franco. And I say, no, it's not Franco, it's Franco.
There's a broom in your name, that energy or the kick in energy comes in.
But the basic concept is that different cultures have different sounds and different so on. And therefore, what should we do? Hopefully learn them and use them correctly.
Wonderful, wonderful. Did you get, were there many Italians these days to support you and your family, or you had to
Well, we live
to
in
go
a
on your
small
own?
country town, and there were a few other Italian families. And in fact, it's interesting. Why did we end up living in Pingelly? Because when Dad arrived in '52, obviously he was looking for work to make some income so he could bring his family out. He did get a job. He was a builder, bricklayer when he came. And he got a job in Bustleton. And he was about to go to that job, but then someone from Pingelly came. They were Italians, the Narducci family. And that family had been here since the 1920s. And so when they asked, listen, we've got a house we'd like to fix up, could you come and do it? He then went to Pingelly instead of Bustleton because they spoke Italian. And so we ended up going to Pingelly instead.
Wonderful. So you were working, and how do you think, or what do you see the differences now compared to your initial days of working and moving, especially moving across places from Pingelly to Bustleton to being living in Mount Lawley? There's too much movement.
Well, I ended up, in fact, Dad continued to stay in Pingelly as a builder. And that is, again, a fascinating thing, because in order for him to make an income, once he had finished fixing up the home of the Narducci family, he, in the process as well, began to think, now, what can I do to make some money? So he then decided to buy some land, and he bought 5 acres of land in Pingelly. And at the time, the land used to belong to Mr. Ernie Lange. And he wanted 60 quid for that land. Now, have you ever heard of the word quid? Things have changed. That's what we used to call the pounds we used to have at the time. And Dad said, oh, it was a bit much. Could we get a bit of discount? So he got it for 50 quid. He then built a house. Now, this is 1953. And at the time, there was a shortage of building materials here in Perth, in the whole of Perth. So he made his own cement blocks to build the house. So he made the cement blocks and built this wonderful house on this 5 acres, which was on top of the town, overlooking the town. Beautiful position, right next to the school. He then tried, obviously, to sell the house to make some money so he could bring his family out. People went to look at the home, and it was a beautiful home. They loved the place. Then, from the outside, then they went home inside to have a look, and they got a shock. What was the shock? The entire floors were made out of terrazzo tiles, which is what Dad had used all his life back in Italy. Here, terrazzo tiles did not exist.
Oh,
And when people saw the floors, said, oh, this is going to be too cold in the winter, and so on. He tried to sell the house for 3 years, did not manage to sell the house.
it's very interesting because even in building designs in India and Australia, here we tend to have a big dining hall or a lobby, but the rooms are very small because they are mostly designed for one person in one room. Back home, we'll have big rooms because the whole family lives together. So it's a joint family system. So one room will not have one person, but rather a mother and father and a small kid. So the rooms have to be big. And if we try to build that kind of houses here, we'll have to spend fortunes. So that's the difference of housing, how we are setting it up.
That's fascinating because back in Vasto, where we lived, we had, in fact, 2 bedrooms, but at the bottom story, 1 bedroom at the bottom story, and then up the stairs into 1 bedroom upstairs. Now, the bottom, which was a smaller room, was for my grandmother who lived there. And upstairs was Mama papa and 5 kids,
Oh.
all in one room. That was it. How things have changed. Fascinating. Of course, here nowadays, people would probably laugh at the idea, but a different system, a different type, and also the income to be able to cope.
Oh, it shouldn't be a wonder to us because the Australian birth rates have been falling precipitously, and there's some concern that it's even below the replacement levels. So, in that scenario, there is no way but to have higher and higher migration to just keep the system going.
If it wasn't for the migration, we would be well below the replacement level.
Oh, our birth rates are at least. The Australian birth rate is. So you are in 1980s. You are working. How about your family? How did you get married? Your kids?
Well, yes, of course, the fundamentals of life, having a family. I managed to find a wonderful Italian young lady. Her name is Lydia. And we met in an unusual manner. In fact, it's fascinating how we meet. I had not managed to get through medicine first year. I took a year off and went back to Pingelly and worked with Dad to make to make some income so I could go back to university the following year. And in first year university, I was most of the time, I think it was 2 terms, I spent in Thomas More College, which is right next to UWA. There I met a number of young men, and one of which was an Italian boy called Giorgio Damiani. And we became friends and we carried on. And one day, the following year, I went to visit him in Maylands, and he had bought for himself a BSA 450 motorbike. And he told me, well, what about you? What about you buying one? So I bought one as well. And these were ex-police motorbikes. So then I came to visit him from Pingelly one day, and he wasn't home. And his mother told me where he was, visiting family friends in Wembley. So I said, she gave me the address, and so hopped back on the motorbike and went to visit him at this friend's place. And it turns out, I went there, and the front door was open, but the flyaway was closed. So I knocked on the door and waited. And then all of a sudden, I saw this figure moving inside, and all of a sudden I heard the shout from this young woman. And that turned out to be, in due course, to become my wife.
Interesting turns. So one thing you said that you started your medicine education, couldn't do it, went back to work, came back so that you can earn some money and come back.
So I went back to university and decided to do an arts degree.
Yeah. And nowadays, it's not that tough. The government gives you HEX debt and all that, so you can keep doing education after education, degrees after degrees. How do you see these two differences over the years?
Right. Well,
on one hand, you had to work and not deserve, but earn your degree in a sense that you were earning and then going and doing your degree. And now you get your degree and then you go and to earn.
Now, I'm getting a bit old then. I've forgotten what the system then. I think you had to pay, of course, from out of your own pocket, the costs. In my case, I managed to do first year arts and I paid for that. But then to carry on, I discovered that there was a system put out by the education department. There was a shortage of teachers in the 60s. So they were looking for people to become teachers. And in order to attract these young people, what they offered was what was called the bond system. And the Bolton system meant that they would pay for your fees. They also gave you a small living allowance. But however, you had to sign a contract that you would teach for the education department the number of years that they supported you. And they ended up supporting me for 3 years. And I did my degree, then did a diploma of education 1 year, and then started to teach. And so I had to teach for 3 years in order to pay off for the bond. That was the system at the time.
So how do you see, was that system better, or now today's system now that the hex loan pays for your whole education upfront? You can finish one degree and go into another degree and get 3 degrees before you even actually start earning.
But you're accumulating the debt.
Yes.
So which you have to pay back in due course. And I would rather support that system. After all, when you're young, you don't have the income, and your parents might not be able to afford to help you either. So the notion that you get the support to cover the costs, and in due course you pay it back, I think makes good sense.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So we have developed for good.
Sorry?
We have developed for good.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
I think
wonderful.
so.
So you start your family. Is there more migration coming from Italy in those years?
Well, they were the days when a huge wave of migration, the war in Europe, caused huge sufferings. And so, luckily, in 1949, now, who was the Prime Minister then and the Minister, again I forgot the names, they decided to then start to bring migrants from Europe. And lots and lots of them began to come in the 50s and 60s.
And how did this waves of migrants from Italy or even from wider Europe because of the war change Australia's identity, change Australia's community?
Well, the impact has been culturally and enormous. In fact, a funny little quotation from an economic point of view, from a working point of view, there is a little saying called Veni, Vidi, Vici, which is attributed to Julius Caesar. And in English it's been translated as we came, we saw, we conquered. But here the Italians have a slightly different variety. They say we came, we saw, we concreted. Including my father, who was a builder. He did lots of concrete.
With a special passion for specific tiles to put in the house.
As well. And in fact, talking about concrete, it reminds me that as a young boy, we used to mix the concrete by hand. We would put in the blue metal on a car, the blue metal, the sand, the cement, and then you put in the water, and by hand you had to mix it to make the concrete. I did all that as a young boy.
Oh, I did it with a shovel when we were building our first home in India. So because the kids were free labor, my father used to put me on, can you mix it, and then someone will take it up to the thing and lay the roof with the concrete.
We have something in common.
Oh, we have a lot in common. All migrants have a lot in common. Shovelers. Maybe I can call myself an Italian and concrete something. So we are here. There's waves of migration. There's things are changing. How were the locals taking this migration? Because there's waves and waves of migration coming, and especially the Aboriginal Australians. How were they taking that all these waves are coming in? What do you think?
In the 50s, there was a substantial amount of racism. I've been called a wog, a dago from the early days. And that was fairly common. And there were even difficulty in behavior as well. Things in general have improved to some degree. But there is still a degree there of racism in Australia. Of course, the Italians now have been accepted more than they were in the 50s. Look at their contribution, especially in all sorts of areas, food in particular, building and so on. But then again, you get more for the Asian migrants, which have become a major... and look at the fear we have about China and so on. And then the latest, we have the Africans that have come and the refugees. So there's still a degree of racism in Australia, which, what a great pity. We ought to be working more together and be collaborative.
Mm-hmm. One thing which I couldn't resolve in my thinking, and I'll ask you the question, is that we celebrate multiculturalism. We welcome more people coming from different parts of the world and making Australia a successful experiment. It's not an experiment, it is a success now. From an Aboriginal Australian point of view, they already think that the first people who came were colonizers. And now all these waves of people are coming. So wouldn't all these new people are colonizers and they shouldn't be coming, and rather more share of Australia should be going back to the Aboriginal Australians?
Well, we have, well, fair enough, you could call the first people colonizers, because after all, what was it at the time? And it's fascinating what the Europeans have done to the entire world. They have been the ones that have gone out and have conquered and taken over virtually the whole world.
Mm-hmm.
Now, so what is a colony? The beginning of a land and changing its system. Whereas nowadays, of course, we have achieved that and we are, well, increasingly developing. Look what we've done to Australia. The mining came later, the agriculture. And of course, when the gold was discovered, that was a major... And in due course, other types of mining have become a substantial undertaking.
With all this multiculturalism, were there already some organizations working for the communal harmony, and in all those organizations, what made you to start VAMA? Give us a brief introduction about VAMA.
Yeah. Well, WAMA began in how did it start? Back in 2006, I think it was, got involved with another association from our region of Italy, Abruzzo. So there was this Abruzzese Immigrant Association, and I got involved with them, and at the time they were building a monument dedicated to the migrants in East Perth on the Esplanade. When we dedicated that in 2008, it was inaugurated. And then in 2009, the president of the association, Umberto Di Lallo, suggested to the committee, why don't we build a pavilion next door to the monument? And the vice president said, but Umberto, we've just had a major economic problem. Remember back in 2007?
Mm-hmm.
And so we said, how are we going to get the funds? Because we needed $500,000 to build the pavilion. And I then suggested, listen, the money for the monument came largely from our region. Why don't we invite the rest of the community, spread the word, and let's see if to create a community-based project. And so we sent out an invitation, we had a meeting, and we had a Greek came along, a Filipino, and a Cambodian, and a Vietnamese. So we got a group of people together. We did the fundraising, and we built the pavilion. Then at the end of the project, what were we going to do? It looks as though we would simply separate and go on our own way. And I thought, that's a bit sad. We've got such a lovely group of people here. So I suggested to the president, why don't we create an association out of this group of people? And that's how the West Australian Multicultural Association came into being.
And how has been the journey till now?
Fascinating. We got together, we became incorporated in 2013. That's 10 years ago. This year we'll have to celebrate our 10th anniversary. And we've been trying to be creative. And what we did, because there are other associations, at the time when we created it, there was one major association, the ECCWA, Ethnic Communities Council. And we went to see them and said, listen, we're not here to create another association to compete against you. We are here to do other things which you are not hardly involved. For instance, the learning about other cultures was not something that was common at the time. And also to create various activities to encourage young people to be proud of their culture and to maintain it. So they're the sorts of things that we've tried to achieve.
And how do you think your journey has been in Vama? Has Vama achieved its goals, or there's a lot to achieve?
We have done a number of things. For instance, one of the things that we did was to create a list, and our emailing company said you can only send 1,000 emails per hour. And so we've made the list just under 1,000. Associations in Perth, government departments, all sorts of groups are in the list. And for the last 10, 11 years, we have been sending regularly, daily, emails which we get from that list back to the list to inform the community of events, activities happening, and also to encourage them to go along and take part in these activities. And a number of people have been thankful for that part of it because they say, oh, thank you, we are now aware of some of the things that are going on. Although 432, I think it is, also said, please take us off the emailing list because we're getting too many emails. We said, no worries, that's fine. So that's one useful thing. We did 8 youth talent shows, and it's beautiful to see those young kids performing items from their culture. And also we've had a number of other activities. We've managed to come and set up an office here in Chewett College. We have meeting rooms where people can come and meet and get together. So a number of wonderful activities have occurred.
And how do you find resources to run Vama, both in terms of people and money?
We are a voluntary body, and we don't have a steady income from any sources. So therefore we have to find ways of getting grants and also raising funds other ways to cover our costs.
And how has that been going on? Are you finding good money and good volunteers?
The money has been a constant struggle to find enough income. We've managed, but it's quite a lot of effort, including, for instance, we've done now 5 sausage sizzles at Bunnings. That's an income. The talent show helps us to make a little bit of money, but not a lot through the grants, but mostly of the money goes back to covering the costs of that event. And also we need more volunteers. That's been a bit of an issue, trying to find people both for the radio station and for WAMA, because potentially we could do a lot more, but we need the workforce to help us get on with things.
Um, so you were already running Vama. So why start another organization called Global Chat Radio?
Well, Global Chat Radio is a radio station. In fact, from the reason why it was started, back in Albany when I was living there, and I lived there for 21 years, in the mid-90s, I heard that the Australian government was encouraging rural community to set up radio stations, which was a good idea. And so I started Albany Community Radio, which was an FM radio station then. When I came to Perth, a friend of mine who was a member of that other committee that I was belonging to, he was working at 6EBA and doing an Italian program. So he invited me to come along and give him a help. And for 2 years, I helped him to that as well. Then in 2015, WAMA used to meet at my unit at here, and I kept saying we needed an office to work from. But in 2015, this friend of mine suggested, why don't you set up a online radio station? And I said, oh, let me think about it. I did. And after all, what does it take to set up an online radio station? A computer, a mixing desk, 2 or 3 microphones, and it's all there. So therefore, being affordable, we decided to set up a online radio station. And we called it Global Chat Radio.
And how has been the response?
Well, again, that is, in order to run a radio station, that's a huge amount of work. And that when we moved here to Chewett College, we advertised and got a station manager, which worked reasonably well for the first year. But we needed more and more people, and it's been hard to find enough people to keep it maintained and ongoing.
During this period of last 20 years, there's many other organizations who have come up and do similar work like Vama, and even in the radio space, there's more similar organizations. So, where do you see Vama and GCR going in the future for maybe 5 years, 10 years down the line?
That is an unknown question at the moment. What will it be like in the future? But the concept was, when we came here to Chewett College, to make this into a hub where people came to do radio work. There's a huge degree of a lack of understanding and knowledge about the cultures we have in here. How many people know that in Perth we speak more than 250 languages? The entire world is here. But what do we know about the other cultures? So there's a huge opportunity and task, really, to get on with this task of helping people to enjoy and understanding the other cultures.
One question which I always had was that, say for example me, I came here as a migrant. I had an Australian dream of having a big house with a front and backyard and lots of money in the bank and kids going to some good schools and whatever. You keep adding to those things. And that requires a lot of time and effort to earn that money and realize those dreams, and maybe 10, 15 years of your life. So when I am involved in doing all that, single-minded focus to achieving my dream, where is the time, or why should I even take time out of my primary goal or primary dream to go and volunteer for an organization, to meet with other communities, or do something like volunteer for a GCR?
That, to some degree, is an important issue. I mean, if you're a young person, you've got a family, you need to make a home for yourself, certainly that puts huge pressures on you, and obviously not a lot of free time. However, it's also a mental attitude. I'm sure that lots of people go to keep fit in various places. They might go to the beach. They might go to do all sorts of other activities. So it's an individual choice. And it would be lovely to see that people spend a little bit of their time in doing more community work. But that's getting harder and harder to find. People are thinking more of myself and not so much what can I do for the community.
And how do you think we can change that, or is it going to change any time in future?
If anything, I get the feeling from observation and talking to other groups that instead of the community coming more and more together, we are tending more and more to separate and go on our own way. And this is a bit sad, because what sort of a community are we going to be building in the future? That is a question that I sometimes ask myself.
So do you think then your effort and work to get VAMA and GCR working and raising them in the last 20 years is going to go waste when people are diverging into their own, following their dreams, or keeping within their communities, or just don't have time for anything?
Well, there it is. This is something that it would be nice to achieve. But between the saying and the doing, how do you make things happen? But let's work towards that to try and achieve as much of it as we can, and encourage people to collaborate, work together, and contribute to the community as much as they are able to.
Or is it also a case where people don't know much about VAMA and GCR for so many reasons, because there's not much visibility on social media, or for example there are so many competing organizations for that attention that VAMA stays on second or third ladder, and then some other organizations take away all the limelight, so you don't get those volunteers because of that.
That, I think, is also another issue. And I'm a somewhat older person, so I don't get involved too much with social media, except through, as I was saying, the emailing, which we have done for years. And many associations, occasionally often I go to various activities and events in the community, and people say, you're the one that sends out all these emails. So in some ways, we are reasonably well known amongst certain people. But in the wider community, probably we are not, as you rightly mentioned, that we are not exposed as much as some others are, and therefore perhaps we're not as well known.
Taking this, your experience of the last 20 years and even the experience of the last 70 years, how do you think, if you have to tell me, how has Australia changed in the last 70 years, over like every decade or something? How is it changed? Is it changing, or is it going into the right directions as per you, or it needs a course correction somewhere?
What to say? A major change since I've come here in the early 50s is technology. Now, I am one that I find fascinating meeting people, because each individual in this world has had a different story. Mm-hmm. And therefore it's fascinating what their story is. And in fact, by the way, I encourage people, and I've made my own little card, a business card, which I give out to people, and encourage people to record their family history, which very few people do. Now, the technology, I go on, I often try to use public transport, especially trains, to go to Perth, to save on fuel, because I sometimes get worried. The amount of energy we use every day in the world, how are we going to cope, to continue to keep it going? So I sit in the train, and sometimes I've taken photographs. Virtually 99%, what are they doing on a train? With their little phone and having a look at what the world is happening. And nobody talking to each other. Now, this is what has happened. I sometimes walk along the street. People don't even look at me because they are busy with, I got their things stuck in their ears and they are concentrating. They don't even look at you in the eyes. Now, I don't want to be negative, but these are the sorts of things that the technological world has brought about. In some ways, potentially, technologies is staggering. To think that people can listen to our radio station from anywhere in the entire world, that's amazing. It would have been undreamt of even 20 years ago. So there we are. But where are we going to? That's a question mark.
So probably we should be using technology to come more closer to each other in terms of individuals or families or even communities rather than just looking into our phones.
Yeah.
That's good. That's good. How has been your interactions with government agencies to help support working of your organizations? Like you're in Tuart Hill, so you are working with City of Stirling. I met you there at City of Bayswater's multicultural event there. So how does that work? And
In some ways, thanks to especially the state government and local government, because to put on the talent shows, we have got grants often from the Office of Multicultural Interest, although they've said that now that they cannot continue to give us grants every year. So that was a little bit of a problem. But the City of Stirling, Bayswater have helped us cover some of our costs. It's been a bit of a... And also there, in order for us to get grants, is a substantial amount of effort and work involved. So a bit more volunteering would be useful in that area as well. But certainly we got some support which has helped us do the things that we've done.
I was reading somewhere in terms of that because the different community groups and organizations and non-government organizations get a large chunk of their funding from government fundings, they don't go out too much to the community to get their funding in terms of donations or things, which prevents the connection of the community organization to the people and the people's investment in those organizations. What do you think?
And in fact, there are the more successful association and groups that exist and have continued to be able to work are the ones that have been able to find funds of a substantial nature and ongoing. And that's for us is a constant struggle, how to cover the costs of Tuart College continuously. It is a constant problem and it could be a major one for the future.
Mm-hmm. So if someone does wants to volunteer for WAMA or for Global Chat Radio, how do they join?
Well, in fact, we're in the process now of, again, going out to the media to spread the word. Contact us. We would love to show them the facilities that we have here, and then hopefully they are interested to carry on and do some things, and we can have a good chat, and see where we can work together.
So do you have a website or a Facebook, or do they contact you directly?
Yes, there are. There is Global Chat Radio in Wama. We have our Facebook page as well. And again, we would have loved to have had a more active Facebook and website. But again, we need people to help us continue to do the work and put in the information.
I would see it as a very good opportunity for anyone who is actually studying marketing or things like that to come and help you out, and then get real world experience of helping a good organization reach out to the masses, and get real world experience, and you're actually helping an organization reach to its target audience.
The potential is there, yes, indeed.
There's-
So let's hope we can spread the word and make contact with the right people and get together and create a wonderful team.
On that very positive note, thank you, Franco, for giving the time, almost 1 hour, and it's a privilege to talk to you for that time and get your time.
Nirmal, it's been wonderful talking to you, and thank you for the opportunity. Much appreciated.
Thanks again. Thank you, everyone. Thank you for listening. And till next time, ciao, ciao. Thank you for listening to this podcast. Do like, subscribe, and share on whichever platform you have heard this. To know more about Perth Dialogues, please visit perthdialogues.au. From everyone in the studio, goodbye.